10 drone pilots, 2 NATO battalions, half a day. That sounds like the opening line of a thriller, but it's not fiction, it's the result of a NATO exercise that shocked military observers across Europe and forced a deeply and uncomfortable realization. The future of warfare has already arrived and Europe is still catching up. Because the force that overwhelmed NATO troops in this exercise wasn't Russian, it was actually Ukrainian. And in today's video we are going to break down what really happened during this NATO exercise Hedgehog 2025 and why the results were so alarming for Western militaries. And most importantly, what lessons Europe must urgently learn from the war in Ukraine if it wants to avoid disaster in the future. Hi, my name is Alexander Kortan. I'm a strategic analyst and media manager from Austria, and I'm also the founder of the German YouTube channel Geopol. And over the past few days a report has been circulating that says a lot about the state of modern warfare and the growing gap between battlefield experience and traditional military thinking. And the story comes from NATO's major military exercise Hedgehog 2025, which took place in Estonia in May 2025, including around 16,000 soldiers from 11 NATO countries, and also Ukrainian soldiers and drone pilots were invited to bring real frontline experience from the war against Russia. But what happened in this exercise stunned many of observers. Because during a simulated battle, just 10 Ukrainian drone operators managed to neutralize 2 entire NATO battalions within roughly half a day. They located and destroyed multiple mechanized units and at least 17 armored vehicles in the scenario. Participants described how NATO troops were detected quickly and repeatedly because they failed to use effective camouflage or concealment techniques suited to a drone-saturated battlefield. So vehicles and camps were identified from the air with surprising ease, and once detected, the simulated strikes followed rapidly. And military experts involved in the exercise described the results as deeply alarming. Commanders reportedly summarized the outcome in extremely blunt terms, admitting that NATO forces were unprepared for the realities of modern drone warfare. But the good thing is, this exercise wasn't a real battle, but if it had been, the outcome would have been devastating for NATO. And exactly that leads us to the most important question today. What lessons must Europe and NATO draw from this? Because at first glance the results look like an embarrassment, but in reality they are something far more valuable, a wake-up call. Because the war in Ukraine has transformed warfare faster than any conflict in decades. Drone warfare, electronic warfare, real-time battlefield surveillance, cheap precision strike capabilities, all of these have reshaped how wars are being fought. And we have to be clear, in this world there are currently only 2 militaries in the world with years of real experience in this kind of warfare, Russia and Ukraine. And this is a crucial point that often gets overlooked, because while the exercise demonstrated Ukrainian strengths, it also revealed something equally important, because Russian drone forces would likely pose a similar threat to NATO troops. Because Russian drone units, especially elite formations dedicated to drone warfare, have played a major role in recent battlefield developments, and analysts have pointed out that specialized Russian drone units like Rubicon significantly disrupted Ukrainian logistics and supply lines and contributed heavily to territorial gains in certain regions. In other words, the danger from drones is real on both sides. And the uncomfortable reality is, if NATO were to face a modern drone-heavy battlefield today, it would likely suffer severe losses. And that is precisely why Ukraine's experience has become so valuable for Europe. Because for years, Western armies prepared primarily for high-tech conventional warfare involving aircraft, tanks and precision missiles. But the war in Ukraine has shown that inexpensive drones can challenge and even neutralize many of these expensive systems. And small quadcopters costing a few hundred or thousand euros can now locate artillery, guide strikes and attack vehicles worth millions. And this is why cooperation with Ukraine has become increasingly important for NATO and Europe. Europe. Because if Western countries want to learn how to fight and survive in this new environment without paying the price in lives, they need Ukraine's help. And that realization is now turning into concrete action as well. Because in recent months, European countries have begun integrating Ukrainian expertise directly into their military training systems. One major development is an agreement allowing Ukrainian instructors to work in German military facilities and training centers. So, Ukrainian specialists are being integrated into schools and training facilities, sharing their real battlefield experience with Western armies, especially the German Bundeswehr. And this marks a significant shift, because for decades NATO trained partners. Now NATO is learning from those partners. And the importance of Ukraine goes far beyond training, because the country has become one of the most innovative centers of drone development in the world. And to understand why this matters, we need to talk about air defense. Because remember, in September 2025, a small number of Russian drones entered Polish airspace and NATO attempted to intercept them using modern fighter jets, and despite deploying extremely advanced and expensive equipment against relatively cheap drones, only a small portion of the incoming drones were intercepted. In clear numbers, NATO only intercepted 4 of 19 Russian drones, and this interception rate is shockingly low, it's about 20%. And now compare that to Ukraine's situation, because instead of facing a few dozen drones, Ukraine must intercept hundreds on a regular basis, and cities like Kiev are attacked repeatedly by waves of drones and missiles. And if Ukraine had interception rates as low as those seen in the Polish incident, many Ukrainian cities would already be in ruins. So there is one important question: how does Ukraine manage to cope with this situation? And one key reason is the rapid development of interceptor drones, a cost-efficient alternative to traditional air defense systems, and instead of relying on expensive missiles, Ukraine has begun deploying drones designed specifically to hunt and destroy other drones. And this approach dramatically reduces cost and allows defense systems to scale up quickly. And so it's no surprise that several European countries have shown interest in this technology and have asked Ukraine about sharing it with partners. And cooperation doesn't stop there, because also the United States have reportedly thought about Ukrainian expertise in developing maritime drones, and European defense companies are increasingly producing Ukrainian-designed drones in Europe. German companies, for example, are now manufacturing advanced Ukrainian drone systems domestically. And this has major strategic implications. Because producing Ukrainian weapons in Europe strengthens Ukraine's defense in the short term, but it also strengthens Europe's defense in the long term, because it gives European countries access to cutting-edge technology and ensures that production lines exist on their own soil. And in a real crisis, these production facilities could rapidly switch to supplying European armed forces and not just the Ukrainian army. But even more importantly, it ensures that lessons from the battlefield in Ukraine are continuously integrated into new systems in real time. And technology evolves at an incredible pace during war, and this cooperation allows Europe to keep up. So we are now witnessing the creation of a new defense ecosystem, one shaped by the realities of modern warfare. And this brings us to a broader realization that is slowly taking hold across Europe. Because for a long time the dominant narrative was that Ukraine needed the West, and that remains true, because for sure Ukraine depends on Western support for its survival. But the reverse is increasingly true as well, because Europe needs Ukraine. Because Ukraine is gaining hard-earned experience at an enormous cost, experience that Europe cannot afford to learn through its own war. So the knowledge Ukraine is generating today could help prevent a future war in Europe, or at least reduce its human cost. Because a strong, independent Ukraine strengthens Europe's security architecture. It provides a frontline state with real combat experience, advanced drone capabilities, and rapidly evolving defense industries. And all this leads to the central takeaway of today's video. The NATO exercise in Estonia was not a humiliation, it was a warning, a glimpse into the future of warfare. A future where drones dominate the battlefield, where visibility is constant, where concealment is difficult, and where cheap technology can challenge expensive military systems. And that brings us to the final question for today. How do you see Ukraine's role in Europe's future security? Do you agree that Ukraine has become a key partner for Europe's defense? Let me know your thoughts in the comment, and if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel Geopol Global. Otherwise, I will end the video here. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.